You're watching Chasing Justice with award-winning crime writer Synova Cantrell. This season on Chasing Justice, I am on the trail of America's cult leaders. Why do people follow these charismatic, narcissistic individuals? Why do their crimes go unpunished for so long? And more importantly, how can you protect yourself from the dangers of subliminal programming? I know you're going to enjoy the show, but before you do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. All of that BS really helps us defeat the algorithm monster. Today we are continuing our story on Jim Jones and his march towards the massacre at Jonestown. Now, if you haven't seen video 1, I suggest you go back and look at that. That goes over some of the disturbing behaviors he exhibited during his childhood. It talks about some abuse and neglect, but it also talked about some of his behaviors that he picked up along the way. I suggest you watch that. You can watch these in any order, but I do suggest that you watch all of them. Make sure and check out video 1. This is video 2. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking about his beginnings into ministry, how he met his wife, how he conned his wife and his wife's family. We're going to be talking about his start out into the Methodist church, the local Methodist church. We're going to be talking about his fake staged healings. We're going to be talking about all of these things, but we're also going to be talking about his social concepts. Now, he was avid follower of socialism and communism, and he believed that the social injustices that he was seeing in his America was could be all fixed by this utopian society that he had fabricated in his head. Now, unfortunately, we all know how his utopian society would end. Now, we're going to jump right into that, but first we want to talk about how he started out. We want to talk about, was he ever legitimate? I was told, and the narrative was when we first started, this whole deal was, the narrative that was told at the time was that he was a good minister that had gone off the deep end. But you listen to some interviews with his biological son, Stephen, and you will find that his son said he was a fraud from the beginning. His son knew he was a fraud from the beginning. He just couldn't get away from him. Now, you'll find out that this is a theme that would travel throughout his entire life. Some people thought he was a fraud and a sham, and other people would think that he was God. And there would be times where he would call himself God as well. Before Jim Jones led over 900 people to their death in Jonestown, he was just a lonely boy in Indiana. He was born in 1931 to poor parents who barely cared for him. He survived off the charity of others, especially one kind woman who took him to church. He was fascinated by how the preacher could command the entire room. He began to preach to invisible crowds in the woods, and even held funerals for dead animals. If he couldn't find a dead animal, he would kill one. He made other kids listen for hours and punish them if they tried to leave. He would lock them in the barn and even shot one kid with a BB gun. He had to have control. During his teenage years, he turned from God to ideology, studying communism and admiring men like Hitler. The boy who preached in the woods would one day command hundreds of people to die. This is how it all began, the making of the monster named Jim Jones. Now, we all know that Jim Jones had decided to denounce God. He didn't believe in anything. He spent his childhood bouncing between churches, but he found the charismatic preachers in Pentecostalism to be the most fiery and the most crowd controlling. Now, Jimmy, as he was known, he enjoyed controlling crowds, and you can read more about that on my blog, and you can see more about that in last week's video. But he was more interested in control, so he had already determined that he wasn't a believer per se. He just used different tactics that he found in churches to encourage people to do things that they wouldn't normally do. But you'll find that he was avid against racism, and he had one African American child that he had invited home, and his father, who was a staunch racist, who was a member of the KKK, wouldn't allow his friend in the house. Now, you will find out that Jim Jones stuck his foot out, put his foot down, and he said, if my friend can't come into my house, I'm not either, and he didn't step foot back into his father's house. Now, you'll find out that his mother and his father would divorce, and he would be moved to Richmond. Now, the racism in Richmond was just as bad as it was in Crete, Indiana, and what people don't realize is in Indiana at that time, outside of the South, go north of the Mason-Dixon line, and the KKK's biggest stronghold was in Indiana. So outside of the South, he was in the middle of an extremely racial area, and so this is something that, we want to say that Jim Jones was a monster from the beginning because that's easier for our minds to compute, but he still had some qualities in him that we all should agree with, and this is what he would use to later manipulate people. But he did try to make an active stand against racism, and his idea was that socialism says everyone is equal, and everyone socialism gets rid of racism and sexism and ageism and all these different things. And so he had these concepts that he would announce to the world that people might actually get behind. And so this is one of those times where he did something good. He wasn't pure evil. He wasn't, at this time, he wasn't, he was fighting against a very legitimate problem that we had in America at the time. And so this is one of those things where you're like, okay, we want to make him evil, but at this point in time, he's doing something good. Now, he moved to Richmond, and he would actually graduate 6 months early from school. So he graduated in December and didn't have to follow through till May. This just fed into his ego even more. He graduated 6 months early. He ended up working at Reed Hospital there in Richmond as an orderly, and that's where he would meet his future wife, and her name was, I have to look it up, Marceline Baldwin. Now, Marceline was a nurse in training, and she was fascinated by the way this young man talked. Now, she was 4 years older than Jim Jones, but he had his way of expounding his beliefs, and she found him fascinating. She agreed with some of the things he said, and his idea of this utopian society and helping people and for the betterment of mankind. These were the things that she got into nursing for. So she had the heart to help people, and this is what this young man was expressing. So they had things to talk about. Now, he did eventually go into Indiana University to study other things, but he would eventually become a minister. Now, the deal with Marceline is she was raised in a highly religious Methodist family. So Jim Jones tries to win over the affections of her parents. Now, her parents, maybe they were a little older and wiser, maybe they were more spiritually attuned, maybe they were more perceptive, but they never really included Jim Jones. They did not enjoy him, they did not accept him, and he never could quite win over her father, although she did eventually marry Jim Jones. He was never really accepted by her parents. Now, they couldn't understand why she would be wanting to marry someone younger than him, younger than herself. They couldn't understand what she saw in Jim Jones. Jim Jones actually started his own so-called ministry as an assistant or as a student pastor at the local Methodist church, because his wife was Methodist. Now, at this point in time, he's keeping his mouth shut. He's not telling his wife he don't believe in anything. He's just going along with the flow. So he's at this Methodist church as a student pastor, and they start giving him chances to speak. Now, he doesn't speak like in the same manner that the local Methodist church spoke. They were polite, they were well organized, they were calm, they were collected, they were a little bit more sophisticated. And yet Jim comes in there shouting down the praises of God from the heavens, like the Southern Pentecostal African American churches. And so he comes in there, and the thing with it is when you're in a crowd and you're on stage, the speaker or the singer can manipulate the crowd by their own emotions. So if the speaker's up, the crowd's up. If the speaker's down, the crowd's down. So he knew this, and he knew how to manipulate the crowd. So he'd come in guns ablazing, just come in like a big show, and everybody loved it. The elders in the church, however, didn't. They thought it was a show. They didn't feel anything coming from this young man other than a facade, and so they weren't real pleased with Jim Jones. Now, Jim Jones still brought in his social programs that he wanted, so he started inviting African Americans to church, and that wasn't acceptable to these pious Methodists. And so at this point in time, America is still entrenched in this racist mentality that somehow someone with a little bit different skin tone is somehow different than you, and they haven't gotten through this concept. And so he's really fighting this, and the elders of that church aren't really accepting this. So this is the first issue that they have. Then you'll find that he starts these healing ministries. Now, these healing ministries are a scam from the So Jim Jones starts using basic con men tactics in the Methodist Church to con people into believing that he has the power of healing. Now, he walks amongst the crowd of people before the service, and he listens. He might talk to some people, but he don't talk to everyone. He would rather slither through the crowd like a snake and just listen to conversations. And then he would pick up specific things. He would be picking up the fact that this so-and-so, sister so-and-so, has a headache, or this so-and-so is having trouble with her husband at home drinking. This person's not sure, what's going on with this and this person. He would literally eavesdrop on people's conversations before the service, and then he would come in guns ablazing, and he would prophesy all these things that he had already heard, and people never caught on. And then he decided to do something even more disturbing. He would start healing people of things they didn't even know they had. So, oh my gosh, you have a headache. He heard you say you had a headache before service, so he's going to get on the stage and he's going to say, someone has a headache. I can feel it. It's around here somewhere. And then he said, it's cancer. And if you will just believe God and cough it up, I will take it right here. And he would literally pull out of his pockets and out of his sleeves, he would pull out rotting chicken gizzards. Be like, see, here it is. I caught your cancer when you coughed it up. And we look at this and we're like, how do people fall for this? How does this happen? Well, you have to understand that, for one, he's very meticulous at who he chooses. Now, later on, when he gets into California, he's going to start picking people out of crowds. He's also going to start planting people in the crowds. Now, he would continue these fake healings, and people would come in droves because they've got this major faith healer there. Well, eventually the Methodist Church kicks him out because they're tired of his shenanigans. I don't know if they found out about the fake healings, but I do know for a fact that they weren't ready to integrate the racists into their church congregation, which is sacrilegious and horrible. But they kicked him out. And by the time they kicked him out, he finally confesses to his wife that he didn't believe in it anyways. And he goes and decides that they're going to start their own church. In 1955, Jim Jones would establish his own church and call it the People's Temple. It was there in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it was going to be a church that was open to everyone. Now, this was socially unacceptable at the time, but he went against all of society's norms and said everyone was welcome at his church. And this brought in large crowds of African Americans. Guys, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you sharing and liking and subscribing. I appreciate your support a lot. Please make sure and check out my sponsor, Bones Coffee Company. I've got their cup here. I absolutely love it. I've got Bones Coffee stuff all over the place. Here is, they have some pre-made iced coffee. This is Cinnabon. This is one of my favorites. I love their Cinnabons. Now, their iced coffee does have sugar in it, so watch out for that if you have any sugar issues. But most of everything else they have is sugar-free. But check out Bones Coffee Company. They so graciously sponsor my show, sponsor Synova Inc. Publishing, and every time you buy coffee or you buy a book from me, it's more than just a cup of coffee, and it's more than a book. You're showing support for a local business owner. You're showing support for someone who's trying to make a difference. Now, you can buy books and coffee anywhere you choose, from anyone you choose, but does that person or that corporation actually care for the victim's family members? I can't say they do or they don't, but I can tell you in this business, in Synova Inc. Publishing, I care completely for the victim's family members. Everything I write, everything I make, I have them in my mind at all times trying to help. So if you enjoy my content at all, please like, subscribe, share. That really helps. And if you can afford to, please check out some coffee. Check out one of my books. My books are all available on Amazon. They're all $20 or less, and you can get the ebooks for less than a cup of coffee. So please check out my sponsors and check out my books. It really helps out. Thank you for watching. From extreme fundamentalist ideologies to the paranormal and the occult, Dr. Joseph Jeffers' message integrated with the times and incited a religious fervor amongst his followers. In the 1930s, he was causing war in Arkansas and inciting violence that would lead to the death of one man and the attempted murder of a local preacher. In the 1940s, he was making headlines in LA for his lewd house parties. In the 1950s, his third wife would be brutally murdered, and her homicide would go unsolved. In the 1960s, he would make headlines in Arizona when he gambled off all of the church funds at the racetrack. In the 1970s, he would be prophesying great and mighty things to do with UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle. But by 1978, he would be building a pyramid to withstand the apocalypse in the state of Missouri. And by 1988, he would die of old age. No one ever stopped this man from stealing millions of dollars, coercing innocent young women, or hiring hitmen to kill his wives. Read this book to find out more about the crimes, the chaos, and the injustice in the life of Dr. Joseph D. Jeffers. How could this man have gotten away with so many crimes? And how could he have flown under the radar? After making so many ludicrous headlines, how do we not know the name of Joseph Jeffers? Now, during his time in Indiana, Jim Jones would make another social statement by adopting mixed-race children. Now, this was a practice that was unheard of during his day, but he wanted to make a statement. So he adopted children of mixed races, whether it was Native American and European or whether it was Korean. He wanted to make sure that he had a mixed racial family. Now, if you listen to some of the interviews that the children that actually survived have to say, some of them think that it was all for show. Some of them don't actually believe that he cared for the children like he should. That is something that we may never know. Was this just a show? We don't know. But in June of 1959, they did have one biological child that they named Stephen. Now, they spelled his name Stephen, but he's pronounced Stephen. Now, Stephen was their only biological child, and shortly after, in 1961, the Joneses would actually make a world-renowned statement by adopting the first black child. So they adopted an African-American child at 10 months old, and they named him Jim Jones Jr. Now, they adopted him at 10 months old, and he was the first African American child to be adopted by a white family in Indiana. So again, we see a pattern of a man doing good things, but we're still questioning the legitimacy of his intentions. So later on, it's real easy for you to say, well, this was a bad guy, but he's doing so many good things, it muddies the water and makes things confusing. Did he love all of his children, or did he use his children to put up a good front to society? We don't know, and we weren't in that house, so we will never know. We can only take the word of 3 of his sons, which were the only ones to survive the massacre in Jonestown. In 1961, Jim Jones' paranoia about nuclear war came to a head. He began prophesying, saying that the nuclear war was going to hit America and wipe it out, and he believed that we needed to move. Now, he was getting this information from one of his mentors, you might say. He had been following William Branham. Now, William Branham gave a big, huge prophecy that really stirred waves across the globe in 1961 that said America was going to be hit with nuclear war and be wiped out. So he actually moved his following to South America at the time. Now, this was something that Jim Jones had followed William Branham's teachings and several other people's teachings, and so he immediately started saying that he had received visions. Jim Jones would never tell you directly that he had gleaned his information off of other sources. It was always an act of God. He had gotten a vision, a dream. God had told him personally. So Jim Jones is not going to tell his audience that he listened to somebody else's material and now he's paranoid about it. He's going to say God told him. And so by 1962, an Esquire magazine article would push him over the edge with this and make him move his entire organization from Indianapolis to California. In this article, it talked about if specific areas were ever bombed with a nuclear attack, that there would be certain places on the globe that might be safer from the nuclear fallout. And one of these places was a particular spot in California. So when Jim Jones' paranoia reaches to the boiling point, he decides to hire out some buses and move his entire congregation to California in one gigantic caravan across the U.S. Jim Jones promised that the promised land was in California. It was, again, a land of milk and honey. It was a land of safety, a beautiful land that they would be safe from nuclear fallout. It's always the promised land. Everything has to be cloaked in religious verbiage and religious words. And so Redwood Valley, California became the promised land, and they migrated there. In July of 1965, they actually established themselves in the Redwood Valley area. Now, the assistant pastor at People's Temple in Indianapolis began to contradict what Jim Jones had to say. He didn't believe in moving the entire congregation all the way across the U.S., and he began to try to tell the people that Jim Jones had moved away from the Bible a long time ago and that he was just preaching his socialist agenda from the platform. And so by the time that Jim Jones actually migrates out to California, he's only got about 140 followers. The rest stayed back at the temple in Indianapolis. Now, while in California trying to get established, Jim Jones does a few brilliant strategic maneuvers, you might say. Not only does he start trying to integrate every race into his church, but he starts trying to right some social wrongs. He starts trying to do more community outreach. Now, he builds connections through community outreach. He finds out that there's some elderly that can't afford nursing homes, so the church opens nursing homes. So they are running 2 nursing homes that are supposedly give you everything you need feed and take care of you. Now, he integrates more and more people into his congregation by all of his social concepts. He believes that everyone is equal, which is true. He believes that everybody should love everybody. Now, you go to these churches, and every church you go to, now I have been to more church than most people. My family had a ministry, and we went 6 nights a week for a good majority of my existence. And so you see churches of all different sizes, shapes, and types of people. You see different types of pastors. You see different types of singers. You see different denominations. You see all of these things. But what you don't find in a lot of places is an open, welcoming heart. A lot of times you go to a church and they have their own little clique, their own little group of people, and you're outside of that. And if you do anything that's not in their social norms, some churches you have to have long dresses, some churches you can't wear makeup, some churches you can do this, some churches you can't do that. And if you don't follow their little guidelines, they ostracize you out sometimes. Now, this is not every church, this is just some. Now, this is something that Jim Jones saw, and he harped on it. He had to take it public and make a big stink about it, and then say, but our church is different. So that church sucks, come to mine, because we're not going to do that to you. Well, they didn't do that, but they would do worse. But he's like, that church sucks, comes to mine. And so he would say, well, that church ostracized you because you were poor. Come over here. You can be a part of us. That church ostracized you because you were raised on the wrong side of the tracks. You have criminal records. You've been addicted to drugs. You were on the wrong side. You did bad things in your past. Whatever he could find, he would literally figure out what it is with you individually that hurt you somewhere else, and then he would cloak himself in that. So you need a friend. We're a friendly church. You need support financially. We'll support you financially. You need a job. We'll help you get a job. You're addicted to drugs. We'll get you off drugs. We'll get you a job. We'll reestablish your life. He was trying to fix all of these things that people desperately needed. So their church numbers swelled drastically. Then he made another strategic maneuver. He started getting into politics. He knew that if he could build connections with political leaders, that he could get even farther down the road. So this is where he separates even farther from the Bible, separates farther from religion, and gets more political and more politically minded. By the early 1970s, Jones had integrated himself into the politics of the area. He had been helping politicians get elected, and what he would do is he would bring in bus loads of promoters. So if somebody had a rally, some politician had a rally, and nobody was showing up, they would call Jim Jones. Jim Jones would fill up his buses. 1,000 people would show up. The news media would be like, oh my gosh, look at all these supporters. Look at all this, and they were literally coached on the bus on what to say, today we're promoting so-and-so, and this is what he stands for, and you hunt down cameramen and you tell them how great this man is. And so he moved the political agendas for people. And so he had that power that he could bring in thousands of supporters for any cause that would further Jim Jones's agenda. Now, Jim Jones was just wanting political marks, is all he wanted. He didn't give a crap about the people. He just wanted those political connections. So there was a specific time that he did this. There was even allegations of voter fraud, where he would send his people to vote in one place, and then they would vote again on the bus. They'd ride the bus and go vote again on another place. Of course, all of this was under the guise, oh no, we're not doing that. We're just taking our buses and picking up the elderly. We're picking up the elderly that can't get to the polling stations, and they're voting. Well, if you look back through, there was a good amount of people that were dead and in the cemeteries in those local areas that all of a sudden were voting. And so was Jim Jones an instigator of voter fraud? perhaps, but we will never know now. It's one of those things that, you know, there are so many other things to worry about in this case that nobody cares about the voter fraud. At this time, Jim Jones starts deriding traditional Christianity. He calls it a flyaway religion. He rejects the Bible. There is one famous message that is recorded on YouTube. You can see it. He literally throws the Bible across the room, lets it hit the floor, and then says, "See, if there was a God, I'd be struck by lightning." And he wasn't struck by lightning, so he says he denigrates the God of Christianity and calls it the sky god and claims himself as divinity. Now, outside of the church, he doesn't say these things. Inside the church, he does. And he does this specifically because he knew that for the most part, if he said that outside, that it would decline his numbers. So he only says this inside. During this time, Jim Jones also starts using drugs. He starts using different things to speed him up. Now, he's always been a very hyperactive person, didn't need much sleep, he'd always keep up with everything, but now his numbers are getting so huge and his organization's getting so huge, he needs some help. So he starts taking illicit drugs to stay awake, and then he starts taking drugs to go to sleep. And during this time, he increasingly gets more and more paranoid. He establishes something called the Planning Commission. Now, the Planning Commission is a group of people in his inner circle that would literally start abusing members of the church. If there was anything, any kind of thing that you may have been doing that you shouldn't be, you would literally get whipped. You were made to sign documents saying that you had thoughts of criminal activities and you wanted to kill the president and you wanted to do these things, and you were made to sign these things. And if you didn't, you would be publicly ostracized. You would be manipulated. You would be made fun of in front of the church. Now, this man had a way of belittling you publicly. So this man who publicly claims to love everybody starts belittling, starts manufacturing blackmail on his own congregation, and he starts forcing them to do things they don't want to do. He starts forcing women to sleep with him because it's for their own good. He starts forcing married couples to not be intimate because they needed to save their energies for work in the church. He would work people 12, 14 hours a day, and then they would have to go to the meetings, which would last 2 or 3 hours of messages of Jim Jones yelling and screaming. And then they would go home and barely get sleep and have to do it again. And if they dared question this, they were being self-righteous and self-centered, and they were ostracized. There were death threats. There was a point where there was rumors of a hit squad. Now, some people tried to defect. There were 8 people who tried to defect that were publicly defecting from the church and talking about it. You'll find some people tried to defect and were killed in unusual ways, but nobody wanted to touch this because by this point in time, Jim Jones had a lot of political connections, and whatever he did, your congressmen in this area were thinking, okay, he has 10,000 votes. You know, if I do anything against this guy, it's got to be serious. I'm going to have a lot of backup. So he used this. He also would manufacture blackmail against political leaders. So there was some political leaders that he would literally set up with a girl that looked older than her age, and then inform this political leader that, oh hey, this person's 16 years old, and now I have proof of this horrible monster that you are. So he would literally manufacture blackmail. If he couldn't find something, he would manufacture it. And this is where everything starts going downhill. While on the outside, the People's Temple looked like a mighty, amazing congregation that was trying to make social change, on the inside, things were coming apart. There are stories of people getting beaten. There are stories of people being manipulated and killed. There are stories where the women were forced to sleep with Jim Jones. They weren't allowed to sleep with their husbands. They had to be subjected to this with Jim Jones. But then there are even disturbing accounts where Jim Jones would actually rape some of the male parishioners of his church. He couldn't have a man be dominant in any way. He had to be the alpha male. And if there was any man that seemed a little too dominant, he would find a way to emasculate him, whatever it took. One man was an attorney, and he had signed a document. And that document ended up saying that this man was actually a hidden homosexual, and he couldn't please his own wife, and he had asked Jim Jones to father a child with his wife to please his wife. And this is the document that ended up stealing this man's child from him. This man and his wife had a child that was legitimately their child. Now, Jim Jones would claim that no, he had had an affair with this woman. It is unclear whether he had actually forced this woman into a relationship or not. But this child was legally the husband and wife's. Now, this child would end up in Jonestown and deceased. But this investigation is what's going to unravel the People's Temple. But in the process of all of this, this is a way that he manipulated men to be subservient to him. Now, in the mid-1970s, Jim Jones is starting to get investigated for various different things, and his publicity campaigns are starting to struggle to keep everything covered up. So he starts looking for a way of escape, and he finds that escape in the jungles of Guyana. Now, at this point in time, there is nothing there but a jungle. They have several people that they send out to Guyana to start clearing the land because they're going to make their promised land in Guyana. Before we get into Guyana, I want to tell you more details about the child custody case that would actually take down Jonestown. Timothy and Grace Stone were members of the People's Temple, but they would eventually become disillusioned. Now, unfortunately, when they defected, Jim Jones kept their child, because there was a document that Timothy Stone had been forced to sign that said that he was a closeted homosexual and he couldn't please his wife, and he had asked Jim Jones to please his wife for him. Now, of course, all of this was BS, but this signed document actually kept their child in the People's Temple, even though these parents were now defectors. Not only were they defectors, they were enemies of Jim Jones, and he would fight them till the day he died, and he would take their child with him. John Victor Stone was born in 1972, and this would be the beginning of the end of Jonestown. The Stones fought Jim Jones in San Francisco court system, and it looked like they were going to win. So before they could, Jim Jones decides to move his entire congregation to Guyana. So nearly 1,000 people moved to Guyana, to this rugged wilderness site that was only supposed to house 500 people. Unfortunately, the child would be taken with him, and the parents would never see him again. So the parents go to Guyana and fight in the court systems there. They win in the court systems there, but unfortunately, no one wants to go onto that compound and actually extract the child. Jim Jones had been bringing in guns, had been bringing in drugs, and bringing in cyanide from the very beginning. Did the Guyanese police force know this? Why weren't they so interested in going and getting this child? But for some reason they didn't. And we may never know why, but we do know that that child would never make it out of Jonestown alive. And these parents would grieve for the rest of their lives because they weren't able to remove their child from the People's Temple. Now we'll talk about Guyana and Jonestown next week. We'll talk about the massacre. We'll talk about the aftermath. I hope you join us. Today's episode is brought to you by Bones Coffee Company. You can forget about boring coffee when you drink Bones Coffee. Not only do they offer a variety of flavors such as strawberry cheesecake and maple bacon, they are a family-owned company that puts great detail not only in their coffee, but in the artwork that comes on each individual bag. Bones Coffee has a coffee club that will deliver your favorite coffee to your door every month. If that wasn't enough, they also have some amazing swag to offer. Check out Bones Coffee Company today. I'll have my affiliate links in the show notes for you.